Hi everyone. I think it's been 5 weeks now since we have the shelter in place, and during this, um, or more like 6 weeks, it's close to 40 days, more than 40 days actually. We have been having our daily group meditation in the morning at 8 o'clock. That really has been a tremendous opportunity for me to really concentrate on my practice. And the thing that I want to talk about today is actually a revelation from that 40, 50 days worth of practice. And it actually started in some way the seed of this came actually before the shelter in place, before when I was still attending the weekly meditation at the St. Quentin prison. In the past, I have talked about my experience at St. Quentin, and I met two people who were former inmates of St. Quentin that have turned out to be someone that has been inspiring, just tremendously inspiring to me. It's been my friends and in some way my guiding lights for my practice. And somehow the two people have a lot to do, have something in common in that not only have they served time at St. Quentin, somehow they have some connection to addictions. One of the gentlemen actually is in his early 50s who have served 3 sentences, a total of 20 years. The last one was he actually served 9.5 years for a 22-year sentence because it was his third felony offense for burglary, burglary for stealing from breaking in cars and stealing to support his drug addiction. The last time he was in jail, he completely turned around and managed to recover from his drug habit and use his time in jail to finish his 2-year degree, and is now studying at UC Berkeley. Tremendous individual, really inspiring. As it turns out, the other gentleman is a much younger person who actually served 5 years in St. Quentin for manslaughter. He was actually apparently, I don't know if he was actually an official member, but he's definitely affiliated with gang activities. And he had completely changed, turned around his life, again, finished his 2-year degree, managed to get technical training as a drug counselor. Actually was transferred to St. Quentin because of a job as a drug counselor, and has been out since March, and now is actually again, interestingly, working in Berkeley in a drug center. So we as it turns out, we haven't really met all three of us together because of the shutdown, but we managed to spend a lot of time online. And so I told him how much I really wanted to take my practice, the practice that I learned from Master Jiro, which has some very, very unique features. The most obvious one is how we emphasize both the body and the mind, and how we emphasize all four postures, not just sitting. And I thought this is really a tremendous technique, tremendous style, and I have done my part to bring that to the elderlies. Turned out to be a really good technique, especially for my parents. And I thought I really wanted to take that to the addiction community, helping people recover from the addiction. So one time they asked me, I said, well, why would you want to do that? What prompted you to do that? I said, well, here's my thought. If I really feel that I could bring this technique, this practice to the general public, and if I really feel that this idea of using the body and the various postures can really help the people in the general public, then helping the addiction community would have been the lowest hanging fruit, because in some way we're all addicts. We're just that we're addicted to one thing or the other. In fact, the very idea of a practice is to free us of addiction to our attachment, our aversions, and so forth, right? Because we talk a great deal about that, and so you can just think of them as just another form of addiction, not on substance, not on behavior. Just it's that kind of addiction is innate to all of us, right? So that really got me to start thinking. And then of course the discussions then is that, well, what does that mean? How do you actually bring that to the community? I said, well, let me think about that. And so this talk is about bringing the technique to the general public, but at the same time using the language of the addiction community. So one of the most successful programs in addiction recovery is something called 12-step program, which is a set of guiding principles that outline a course of action to help people to recover from addiction. Now, of course, it was originally proposed by two gentlemen, one by the name of Bill Wilson and the other one by the name of Robert Smith, who was a physician. And of course, they come from the Christianity background, and so originally the technique is very, very much tied to the religion of Christ, the Christianity. And originally it was proposed as a methodology for alcoholics. So this is the beginning of what is now called the AA, the Alcoholics Anonymous. But of course, once it gets started, it became so successful that it generalized to all kinds of substance dependence, not just alcohol, but cocaine, heroin, crystal meth, marijuana, and more recently, all kinds of painkillers. Some of them over the counter, some of them not. Oxycontins, Vicodins, fentanyl, all kinds of stuff like that, and some of the substance abuse that are less abused, like cigarettes, sugar, eating too much sweets, all kinds of problems that people have with substance dependence, but also with compulsive behaviors. So you have like Gamblers Anonymous, people who consume food, couldn't control them with sexual desires, hoarding. A lot of people hoard stuff, all kinds of stuff, newspapers, magazines, dolls, you name it. A lot of abuse, or even self-abuse, cutting yourself, that kind of thing, or workaholics, domestic violence. Some people are addicted to cleanliness, extreme cleanliness, all kinds of stuff, right? So it's been a very, very successful methodology. There's 12 steps. So as soon as you mention 12 steps, everybody knows what you're talking about. So at the most basic level, 12 steps is about asking God to help. They essentially treating the substance or the abuse problem as a mental problem, as one where it's not just about your body, it's about your spirit. So when you talk about 12 steps, you have to understand that God is a big part of this. However, the people who started the 12 steps way back in 1938, they were very, very smart. They actually wrote this set of documents using not just God, but God as we understood him, or as we understood her. In other words, they really generalize the concept of a God, that it might be an external God, like, he's the creator as we understood it. It could be an internal God. It's God as you understand him. So it could be an internal God. It could be a personal God, right? That you could have a personal relationship with a God, which is typically how gods are worshipped in the normal way, or in a more Buddhist kind of approach, is that it's a spirit. We would refer that to universal God. It could be a God who created mankind in his own image. And it could be a God that was created by mankind in their own image. Who knows? But the point is, don't underestimate that just because you don't like the word God. They're very, very smart by describing not God, but God as we understood him or her. Okay? So it's just a higher power. That's all it is. It's just a higher power. So the 12 steps to follow God as we understood him or her really start with the admission that I can't. Okay, so that's really, if you take the 12 steps and you divide it up, the very first thing you have to do is just acknowledge that whatever it is that you're suffering, whether it's alcoholism or addiction of any kind or compulsive behavior of any kind, you just have to admit that you can't control it anymore. You just say, I can't anymore. And then you have to recognize that there's a higher power that can give you strength, right? So then it goes from I can't to God can. Again, it's God as we understood him. Once you accept that there's a higher power who can give you strength, then you have to seek him out. So that goes to the part where you seek God. You start to examine your past failures with the help of a professional or a sponsor, someone who can help you along the way to make amends. Then the thing is, once you've figured out a technique, a methodology, a system, a platform, then you have to follow. You follow God, or God as we understood him, which is to learn to live this new life with a new code of conduct, a new code of behavior. What's most interesting is that if you're successful in doing all that and you're in a recovery, the one that seals the deal is the last one, which is to help God. You now have to put yourself out there to help others who suffer from the same. So it's a closed loop. It's to accept that you can't. It's beyond your control. Find a higher power who can give you strength. Look for that higher power. Follow that higher power, and finally, in return, help that higher power, so that we can continue. And again, it's written in a way that says that it's God as you understand him. It could be, as I said, it could be an external God, it could be internal God, it could be a personal God, it could be a universal God, it could be a God who created mankind in his own image, it could be the God that we created in our image. It's God as you understand him. I thought that was amazing. I thought that was just amazing. So what does it mean? What does it mean? Well, the people who put this program together are Christians, so they always understand sin, and so they always understand that addiction is really just a sin. It's not the substance that's giving us problem. It's the desire to have that substance. It's the sensation from having that substance that is a problem, right? So they avoid using the word sin, but that's what they're talking about. That's what they're talking about, is that there's, I remember one of my favorite movies in 1995, a movie called Seven, my two favorite movie stars, Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt. They talk about the seven sins, the seven deadly sins that the Christians talk about: the pride, the greed, the wrath, the envy, the lust, the gluttony, the sloth. Right? Gluttony is you overeating. You just consume food. Sloth is when you're lazy. Right? Now, in the Eastern tradition, going back to the origin of Buddhism to North India, the Sikhs have what they call the five thieves. These are the thieves that steal you away from your true self. The five thieves are lust, wrath, greed, attachment, and excessive pride. And it's all of those, just different languages that really identify the true source of the addiction. It's not the substance. The substance is a vehicle, but it's not the substance. So in that sense, we all have the same problem. We all have the same problem of not able to control our desire and attachment and clinging. It's just that some of that kind of showed up as substance abuse and or behavior. From a Buddhist standpoint, all of these problems, all of these defilements, really starts with what we call self, or ego is self, right? So the question is, where does the self come from? Right? I in my other talks, I talk about the original sin. I talk about the book of Genesis, where God, after he created the Garden of Eden, and he created Adam and Eve, the first man and women, he told them, you could do anything you want here. You can eat anything off the trees except this tree. This tree is called the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now, I talked about this in the past, and good and evil in the Jewish language just means everything. The good and the evil are a way of speaking that is a two extremes, so everything in between. So it should be translated as the knowledge of everything. And while knowledge has a good connotation, but you really think about what knowledge means, it starts with discernment, analysis, differentiation, distinction, labeling, preference, prejudice, judgmental. It's all about self. It is all about self. So in other words, when God created the original man, they were meant to be compassionate, loving kindness, joy, and equanimity. Those are the true property of the original man. The problem is that once they acquire the sense of self, things go downhill. Things go downhill. And of course, in the Buddhist teaching, we go very deep into this self. And in the past, I talk about the 5 skandhas, the 5 aggregates. The self is actually one of the 8th consciousness. In that it is the one that is that activates the karma, right? That activates the karma, and once it activates the karma, it then activates the rest of us. And when it activates the karma, it generates the mind consciousness, the 6th consciousness. And we talk about the different mental factors, the 51 mental factors. And we separate the mental factors into Kusala and Kusala. Kusala means wholesome, right? Virtuous. And Kusala is opposite, right? We talk about this. So Kusala is examples of Kusala mental factors like faith, mindfulness, energetic, shame, understanding of and appreciation for causality, right? So every action there's a reaction, understanding that. Non-attachment, non-aggression, calmness, equanimity, non-injurious, do not want to hurt other people, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? Which is in the Bible, Matthew 7. Interestingly, is exactly the same saying from Confucius, who was born 500 years before Christ. Those are what we call the Kusala. Those are the good seeds. The Kusala, the unwholesome mental factors, the bad seeds are delusions, lack of shame, disregard for consequence, restlessness, greed, wrong view, conceit, hatred, envy, sloth, doubt. Right? So everybody's talking about the same thing, whether you're Christian or you're Sikh or you're Buddhist. We're all talking about the same thing in that we are fully capable of Kusala thoughts. These are what we call non-self, universal compassion, or the Kusala, which are the very self-centered actions, mental actions. So in Buddhist teaching, we summarize all of the Kusala mental factors into what we call the 5 hindrances. In fact, the 5 hindrances is just more detailed explanation of what we call the 3 poisons. The 3 poisons that are symbolized by a bird, a snake, and a pig. The bird represents attachment to our sensory input or our pleasure thoughts, right? So when you're addicted to cocaine, you're not addicted to cocaine as much as you're addicted to the sensation that is caused by the cocaine. So that's the first hindrances, and we symbolize that with a bird, because once upon a time in North India, there was a kind of bird that would die when their owner died, because they're so attached to the owner. The second hindrance is we represent it by a snake, and we call this aversion, which is basically negative reaction, right? So if you step on the snake, the snake would only have one reaction, which is to bite you, right? So we call this aversion, ill will, hostility, resentment, hatred, and bitterness, and so on and so forth. And finally, the third poison is what we call ignorance, and we're represented by a pig. And in the 5 hindrances, they're actually separate into 3 different categories, 3 different hindrances. Sloth, right? Feeling very depressed, lack of energy, lots of inertia, can't sleep. Restlessness, which is the opposite, is that inability to calm the mind, wanted to do something but don't know what to do. It's the difference between action and activities, right? And finally, it's doubt. It's this lack of conviction, trust, lack of faith. So in the Buddhist teaching, it's the 5 hindrances that represent all of the 8 kusala, mental actions. And in that sense, we are all addicts. We are all addicted to these 5 hindrances. Addiction to a substance or addiction to a set of behaviors that are self-inflicting is actually a side effect of being addicted to these 5 hindrances. And that's what I mean by wanting to take our practice to the addiction recovery community, because I consider them the lowest hanging fruit. If I could do that, then coming back to cure the general population of addiction to the 5 hindrances would be a walk in the park. All right? So in other words, in summary, overcoming addiction is about overcoming self and about overcoming the 5 hindrances. So when we practice, there's this thing called the 4 stages of enlightenment. The 4 stages of enlightenment. In the past, I talk about this being the elementary school and the high school. And if you graduate from high school, then you're ready for college, which is to become a Buddha. But in these 4 stages of enlightenments, the last stage is called Arahant, and most of us have heard that. But probably we don't know much about the first stage. The first stage is something called Sotapanna, and it's what we call the stream enterer. So the title of this talk is the 12 steps to stream entry. So I'm using the methodology of the 12 steps to describe how someone can practice towards the first stage of enlightenment, how we could enter the stream, the so-called stream. And by stream, Buddha have described the Eightfold Path as a purified stream. That is, once you enter your practice, your practice enters into the Eightfold Path, then you have entered the purified stream. And that would take you step by step through the 4 stages of enlightenment to being an Arahant, and then ultimately practicing either at the same time or not the Bodhisattva path. And together it would take you to enlightenment. So the Eightfold Path, without getting into details, is really can be separated into 3 steps. So the first one is really more about morality. Right? This is the foundation for a practice. It's too easy for us to think of Buddhist practice as a non-sectarian practice, non-religious. That's not true. It's like any other religion in that sense, that there is a morality foundation. You have to practice with certain standards, right? So the morality is right speech, right conduct, right livelihood. Okay. Then once you have that, then it's the 2 steps. The 2 steps, typically we when we practice, we talk about samatha and vipassana. So the middle step is samatha, and I use the word practice because that's really when you put in the effort, the right mindfulness, right concentration, and so forth. And finally, you get to the vipassana, which is the wisdom. So you can take the Eightfold Path, the 8 elements, and just separate into 3 groups: morality, practice, and wisdom. Wisdom is when you achieve right view and right resolve, right? So again, the samatha, different explanation for that: tranquility, calmness, centering. It's really how you bring your senses together and how you bring your mind together, the physical part of the mind, your brain, how you rest your eye, your nose, your mouth, your tongue, your ear, and your body and your mind, right? It's resting those, and then eventually then you go into the Vipassana, which is, Pasna means seeing. Vipassana is seeing the inside. And so this, people call it insight, observation, or contemplation. And before I go on, I want to make sure that it's not true that you start with samatha and you go to Vipassana. You can actually start with Vipassana and then go with samatha. In fact, there are other ways of practice where the two are non-indistinguishable. Okay. In summary, if you think about the four postures, again, this is the thing that is special about Master Yuru's teaching, is that we practice in all four postures. So the four postures are separate into one that are in motion and the one that are still, right? Like sitting, standing, lying down. Those we go from samatha to vipassana. But when you're walking or doing exercise, then they go from vipassana to samatha. And we can talk about that more. I have talked about it already in the past, but we can talk about that more. So as you practice, and when you achieve the first stage, right? The first stage, the sopapanna, is when you have overcome the five hindrances. That's the first stage. But actually, there's some preparation work, and I'll just mention that here, which is called the three shackles. Okay, the three shackles is this. One is you have to be aware of the self, you have to be aware of the doubt, and you have to be aware of your desire to cling to rites and rituals. Okay, so those are three things you are the preparation for this practice. And then once you get started, then when you finally get to a point where you could overcome your addiction to the five hindrances, then you have achieved the first stage of enlightenment, which we call sotapanna. And then after that, then you go on, and then you eventually achieve the highest stage, which is one of arahant. Okay, it's not that hard. It's actually not that hard. My revelation for the last 50 days of non-stop practice, the revelation is that this is doable. The first stage is doable within my lifetime, within your lifetime. So now I'm getting to the meat of the talk. So it's already 30 minutes. So I'm getting to the meat of the talk, which is the 12 steps to stream entry. And I'm using the 12 steps program that has been laid down since the mid 30s by these two fine gentlemen. I'm using that as the template. Okay, so there are different ways of describing these 12 steps. So one way is to use a single word. So the first step is about honesty. Okay? Or as I explained, it's about recognizing that I can. This is not something you can do on your own. You need help. Okay? So this is about honesty, about accepting, right? Accepting reality, right? It's the final step of acceptance. You already gone through denial, you've gone through anger, you've gone through depression, you've gone through bargaining, and you have accepted now that you have a problem. You are addicted to the self. You're addicted to the five hindrances, which is really the reason why you're addicted to the substance and the behaviors. Now, in the original writing of the 12 steps, it says, we admit that we are powerless over alcohol or our addiction, that our lives have become unmanageable. Okay? This is important. This is important. Accept that. And so this is essentially what the first truth of the Four Noble Truths, if you think about it. The first truth is dukkha, is understanding that life is I wouldn't say suffering, but at least life is not totally satisfactory, right? You have to accept that. In order to be a Buddhist, you have to accept the first truth of the Four Noble Truths. So this is acceptance. This is being honest with the reality that you're not in control. However, in Buddhist teaching, the reality is the reality when the true reality is when you have overcome the distortion by the five hindrances. Okay? And I have repeated the story that Master have told numerous times about the banyai tree. The story was that one day the historical Buddha was walking in the forest with his attendant Ananda, and Buddha points to a tree called the banyai tree, and he says, Ananda, do you know this tree? And Ananda says, yes, I do, but I want to hear what you have to say. And so, because you're the master, I'm just the recorder. So the Buddha says, well, the banyai tree actually starts with the seed. When the seed falls on a tree, it grows and it completely entangles the original tree to the point where you no longer recognize the original tree. Where, in fact, the original tree most likely is dead. That's why most banyai trees are hollow. And he says, that's our mind. That's our mind. That it all starts with a single seed that we call self. And from there, it grew and it became the 5 hindrances. And that's why in our way of thinking, you can't really see reality until you are completely overcome the 5 hindrances. But you have to accept that there is a reality there somewhere. Okay? So the second step, in summary, is called hope. Or put another way is, if you can't, God can. God can help you, right? God as we know it. It says, come to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. Right? In other words, there is a God somewhere that you can go to. On the other hand, the God might not be an external God. It could be an internal God. In fact, in the book of John, in one of the Gospel, book of John 4:12, it says that no one have ever seen God. But if we love one another, God will live in us, and His love is made complete in us, right? So we have to believe that there's good in us, that there is positive energy in us, right? In fact, I use this example a lot when I teach the elders. I asked them, how is the weather today? And he said, oh, it's very nice, it's very sunny. And then I said, well, how was it yesterday? And he says, oh, yesterday was really bad, very cloudy. I said, well, actually, the sun is always there. It's here today. It was there yesterday. The sun was always there. The sun always shines upon us. It's just that there's this cloud. And so what the Christians call grace, what the Buddhists call Buddha nature, what the Westerner call original nature, that's the God in us. We have to believe that they exist. It's just that they're covered up. They've been strangled like the banyai tree, or they're covered up by this black cloud. In fact, in the Bible, in the letter to the Euphrates, it says, for by grace you are saved through faith. And this is not from yourself. It's God's gift. You already have it. You already have it. God gave you the grace, what is called the grace. You already have. You just now have to believe in it. It's already there. You don't have to find it. The third step is called faith. That's after you accept that you can't control this, after you accept that there is a higher power, either outside of you or within you, that can help. Now you have to let go. You have to have faith. You have to surrender yourself. And the original writing is, made a decision to turn your will and our lives over to the God, over to the care of God as we know Him or her. There's a gentleman by the name of Raphael Cullis, who again is a former inmate. And a couple of weeks ago, he couldn't attend our Sunday night get-together because now that we cannot go inside the prison, we have to do Zoom like everybody else. And he sent over a letter, and we read it in front of everyone. And he talks about the virus, and he talks about how we don't need to be afraid of the virus because virus need a host. In other words, if you protect yourself, you keep the distance when you go out. You don't go to bars, you don't go to theaters, you don't go to restaurants. At least not the one that's very crowded. You keep a distance. You wear facial covering so that the virus cannot attack the membranes that are in your nose, in your eye, and in your throat. And you wash your hands. Then the virus is just a virus. It doesn't even have life. It can't do any harm because you deprive the virus of a host. I was so inspired by that talk. I was so overwhelmed by that talk. Because our 5 hindrances are the virus of our mind. They are the mental virus. They can't do us any harm unless we offer them a host. The host is the self. Okay? That's faith. You have to believe that this can be done, that you can overcome the 5 hindrances if you could figure out how to deprive it of its host. The 4th step is called courage, or look within. Find it in you. The original language is make a searching and fearless moral inventory of yourselves. Moral inventory is your karma. You have to understand that karma is very simple. It's just a record of the past. Every mental volition, any thought that you have is like electricity. Once electricity is generated, there is magnetism. Once magnetism is generated, there is a record of that. Because all materials are magnetic in nature. That's all karma is. Okay? But karma is more than that. Karma is also a dormant force that can influence your future thought. Just like if you have a magnet, it can generate electricity. All it needs is motion. So karma is both a record, just a passive record, and a force. It can be both passive and active. And you just have to understand what that is and how karma influences your 5 skandhas. Okay? So we talk about 5 skandhas, and in the future, if I have a chance, I'll talk about the Heart Sutra. I just finished essentially 2 months worth of lectures in Cantonese about the Heart Sutra. And I talk about the 5 skandhas are empty. What does that mean? It means this. It means that you can change your destiny. That's all it means. Right? So in that sense, karma is the ultimate change agent. If you could change your karma, or you can change the way you do not follow karma, you can change your destiny. So you have to believe that there is a way. You have to have the courage. The 5th step is integrity. The original language is admit to God, or God as we know it, admit to ourselves, and admit to another human being, someone we call sponsor, the exact nature of our wrongdoings. Now, in Buddhism, we don't use the word morality. We use the word kusala and akusala because there is no outside power. If the 5 skandhas are empty, it means that we can control our own destiny. That means that no other forces or form can control our destiny. So It's kusala and akusala. So every action is either akusala or kusala. And kusala means that is wholesome. It actually is the one that cleanses your future karma. Akusala is the one that makes it worse. So in this way, integrity is about having kusala. Is about having kusala actions. Okay, so I call this kusala is the new morality. The fifth step is willingness. Prepare for change. The original writing is, and we're entirely ready to have God remove all of these defects of characters. This takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work. In our practice, we focus on the breath and we focus on the body. And you actually have to learn to focus on your breath. That's actually what we call mindfulness. Mindfulness just means remember. Remember meaning that we don't let our mind drift away. It's the example that I use. The example I use is as if you're crossing the street with your child. You would never... You always hold the hands of the child. Why? Because if you don't, the child get kidnapped or get run over by a car. It's very dangerous. So why would you not hold on to your mind? And why would you let your mind wander? Because if you let it wander, it's definitely going to get kidnapped or run over by the five hindrances. So if you want to change, willingness to change means that willingness to accept a set of skills that allows you to maintain mindfulness, and the tools that we use to maintain mindfulness depends on the posture. Again, it depends on the posture. If you're sitting, standing, or lying down, it's your breath. If you're walking and exercise, it's your body. Right? So I remember one time we talked about, a senior student was translating the Anapana Sati Sutta, which is the ana means in breath, pana means out breath, sati means mindfulness, and the first step is called count the breath. And as soon as he said it, the master says, no, that's wrong. That's not the translation. I said, what do you mean? That's been the translation for 2 centuries, or maybe even more, maybe for 1,000 years. And master says, no, that's not the original meaning. It's not about counting your breath. It's about making every breath counts. Willingness means taking a step forward. And every breath is the first step. Step 7, humility. Seeking God's help. Humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. Right? How to be humble. How to be tolerant. Again, in the Bible. From the book of Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the law require of you? To act justly, to have love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. So the 3 things you have to do is mercy, justice, humility, which are the 3 of the 6 or 3 of the 10 parami or paramita, depending on the tradition. Mercy is generosity. Justice is morality. Humility is tolerance. So in other words, walk with God. Accept Jesus as your personal guide. Right? Jesus practiced generosity, morality, and tolerance, or otherwise known as humility, right? Because book of Matthew, eye for eye. He says, you have heard it, that it was said that eye for eye, tooth for tooth. But he says, but I will tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek. If anyone wants you to sue you and take your shirt, you hand over your coat. If anyone forces you to walk 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Right? An eye for an eye. Love for your enemies. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and love your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Walk humbly. Right? Tolerate not only your friends, but your enemy. That's God's teaching. That's the Buddha teaching. Okay? Practice the 3 paramita. Number 8, love. Universal love. Right? Become willing. Make a list of all the persons you have harmed and become willing to make amends to them all. Means being selfless. Practice universal love. Right? That's why we practice the 4 immeasurables. We practice loving kindness to eliminate hostility. We practice compassion to eliminate suffering. We practice empathy to eliminate jealousy. We practice equanimity to eliminate arrogance. Number 10, responsibilities. Recommend. The original writing is make direct amends to those wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Matthew 7:12. Confucius, 551 before Christ. Take responsibility. Number 10, discipline. Daily inventory. Original writing is continue to take personal inventory, and when we are wrong, promptly admit it. In the Buddha's teaching, another 2 of the 6 or 10 paramita is determination and diligence. When we practice, we make every breath count and we make every step count, whether you're sitting down or you're walking. Always maintain mindfulness. If you maintain mindfulness, you would no longer be captive to the 5 hindrances, right? And if you can cure yourself of addiction to your 5 hindrances, you have entered the stream. Okay? Number 11, awareness. Pray and meditate. Sought through prayers. This is from the original writing now. Sought through prayers and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him or her. Praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. It's a journey. It's a journey. It's hard work. But the journey is actually more valuable than the destination. And in that journey, as you practice, is what we call right knowing and right mindfulness. Right means to be free from the hindrances. That's what right means, sama. Right knowing means that we have to be aware of what we're doing. We have to be aware of where our mind is so that it's not kidnapped. Right? Like hold on to the kids. Number 12, the last one is service. Give it away. The original writing is having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. We try to carry this message to alcoholics or other addicts and to practice these principles in all our affair. Another 2 of the 6 or 10 parameters, generosity and renunciation. You have to really treat generosity as an investment strategy. The more you give, the bigger the account. The more you give, the more you can relieve yourself of the self, the further away you would be from the hindrances. That's why you need to practice generosity. I call this the divine ATM. Okay? You walk to the ATM, you check your balance, you say, well, I can only afford $20 today. No, you can afford $2,000 today, even though your account doesn't support that. Because as soon as you draw it, it fills up. It fills up because as soon as you practice selflessness, then you're further away from the self. You're further away from your hindrances. Then you're closer to God's grace, or what we call original nature, or what we call Buddhist nature. So these are the 12 steps towards the first stage of enlightenment. Okay? Thank you.